Hey, MBA hopefuls, and welcome to MBA Waves, your weekly vidcast talking all things business and education. I am your host, Eric Lucrezia from Candidate Coach, as usual, joined by my co-host, Bara Sapir. Hey, Bara.
Hey, Eric. Hey, Barbara. It's great to see you both. I'm with City Test Prep, for those of you who don't know me, and Mindflow. And it's great to see everybody this morning.
Yeah, you too. I feel like just last week I was wearing a short sleeve shirt. Now I'm already in some kind of sweater thing. So falls upon us. Anyway, this week at MBA Waves, we are talking all things the CV, getting your CV or resume, depending on where you're from. MBA ready. What does that mean? How to do it? And we are blessed to be joined by our trusted friend and colleague, Barbara Coward. Hi, Barbara.
Hey guys, I was just thinking that, we kind of spread all the different time zones, Eric, with you in Paris and Bara in the Bay Area, and I'm on the East Coast near Washington, D.C. So we're kind of spanning the world almost.
Indeed. A good part of it. Just wanted to mention how we met. We kind of know each other from an association called AGAC, which I put the little logo up there. AGAC is the Association for International Graduate Admissions Consultants, and it is a fantastic organization that, I guess, well, it's a level of quality and ethics that governs people who work in our industry. And we do conferences throughout the year, and it's a great way to meet people. And if you're looking for an admissions consultant for your MBA or master's or even other kinds of degrees, AGEC's a great place to start to find the right person for you. So just wanted to mention that, and thanks to that we know each other. Anyway, let's jump right into the conversation about the CV or resume. So Barbara, since you're our guest, we'll let you answer first. Bara and I will probably jump in from time to time. So first things first, let's clear one thing up from the beginning. What the heck is the difference between a resume and a CV, or is there one for you?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity. I follow MBA Waves very closely. I'm really excited with all the great content that you put out. So thank you for having me today. I really appreciate that. So, it's one of those things where even if I gave the kind of the dictionary definition, it depends on what everyone's individual definition is. So some people will use the word interchangeably. A resume is a CV or CV is a resume. I think of it more too as a cultural difference, where the US tend to say resume and Europe, more of a CV. I worked in Europe like you, Eric. So, I'm kind of familiar with that side of it. And then also kind of academic. I think of professors applying for tenured jobs in universities would, use the term CV, but, resume to me is the word that I think, and this is my personal preference, that I use for the MBA admissions journey, because it really is just kind of this laying out of this narrative or career trajectory, academic trajectory that provides a snapshot of who you are. It's often one of the first things that admissions officers will look at to get a sense of who they're reviewing. So, again, it depends. Some people use it interchangeably. Just don't be confused if you're applying and some schools say CV and some schools say resume. It's often used interchangeably.
So what, in your view, is the main purpose of the CV or resume? Well, here we'll use them interchangeably for MBA purposes. So what is the main purpose of the CV in general and in the MBA world, and what can it do for you think, Barbara?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do with working with my clients and just kind of my perspective with this industry is I flip the kind of narrative around, if that makes sense. So oftentimes when we're applying to business school, it's all about us. It's like, okay, I'm applying. I really want to get into Stanford GSB. Only 6% of applicants get in. What can I do? Oh, great. The resume, I can tell them how the great stuff I've done and who I am. And I encourage people to kind of flip it around and look at it from the perspective of the school. And the school is first and foremost building a cohort. And I go back to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and the golden ticket, because I like to make the process kind of fun. And it's almost like if you get into Harvard, if you get into Stanford, a lot of these schools, it's like you've got the golden ticket. You're one of the few people who were, because so many talented people apply and they don't get in. We kind of always scratch our heads like, why didn't this person get in or whatever? So, and so if I am working in admissions and like Eric, I know you have from being on the other side of the desk, you're trying to build a class and your first job is to make decisions in a very short amount of time with limited information. So if I am, and I've certainly done this, you click on a name and a whole list of files to click on, and you're like, who is this person? So the resume is a great opportunity to give a quick snapshot of who you are. Now, the plus side is that the reader will only have a few minutes to kind of make sense of it, because they've got to work through all the rest of the application in terms of the essays and the recommendations and the test scores and the transcript, et cetera. So you only have a few minutes, but you want to make sure that that couple-minute glance really tells the story of who you are. And what I always say to clients, what do you want the resume to say about you? What do you want them to know about you? And so, and just make it easy for the reader to make sense of who you are. You know, if I have to read it and I'm like, there's a lot of technical language, and I understand, and I'm like trying to make sense why they had a job here and a job here. Just again, it's your opportunity, it's your personal brand to really tell the reader who you are, rather than a show-off piece, to say like, look at what I've done and how wonderful I am, because there's a lot of wonderful people applying. So, that's demystify who you are is really the job of the resume.
You've said a lot of good things there. I just wanted to dissect for a second. And Bara, feel free to cut me off and jump in.
I'll jump in after you.
Okay. I mean, one thing you said is like to show who you are, like show versus tell. That's like something you hear a lot in the admissions consulting word, and like demonstrate also with your essays, rather than just kind of like saying, I've done this. And also you mentioned technical jargon. That's something that I think a lot of people make that mistake. They're trying to use the vocabulary within their fields or skill set. And, you're applying for an MBA program. These people are not going to know a lot of the technical things you're talking about. If you're coming from something very technical, like the engineering world, perhaps legal, military, there's no point. Like, be simple, be straight to the point. You also mentioned personal brand, and that is it. I think that right from the very beginning, that kind of like the header, in French they would say the en-tête, on your CV, really is the first thing that people see of you. And it's kind of like it plays into your image, and their brand is going to carry through. It's going to be that common thread that runs through everything in your application, in the formal aspects that are your essays and interview later, to the less formal pieces like your LinkedIn page and other places that you're represented online. So thanks, Barbara. There's a lot of good stuff to unpack in that conversation. Bara, I know you wanted to comment as well.
Well, first, it's reminded me of the conversation that we had last week with George Lafarge, where he was talking about Asian students, and they were, what happens when you have a student?
Forge. Sorry, I was lost for a second.
Okay, so he was talking about they might have gone to the best schools in Asia, but someone here might not necessarily know that. Right. And so it's an interesting conundrum, because you also don't want your resume to be so packed visually that the graphics just is off-putting. Like, you want to have space, I would imagine, where you can read things. But I was thinking about, when I look at resumes, and I see them all the time, sometimes people write their skills, and sometimes they have a paragraph saying who they are, and sometimes they start with education. So for the MBA applicant, does it matter what you start with, or should they be thinking about where they're coming from? Like, if they've only been out of work for 3 years, do they want to highlight their education, or do they want to highlight their work? So how would you navigate what would be the most advantageous way to present themselves?
Yeah, so I'm going to give the answer of it depends on the situation, as often is said. With that, I see a high five from Eric in the background on that one. But I kind of go back to going back to the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the golden tickets. If how many people are going to get admitted out of all the applications that apply, what is your value proposition that you're bringing into the program? And so, for somebody, for example, I'm working with right now, has a master's degree. And, if I'm an admissions officer, that person to me is going to be less risky, because I don't have to worry about the faculty getting mad at me like this person isn't going to succeed in a graduate program. They've got that proof point. They've done that. So in that case, while I often put education at the bottom of the resume, we led with the education. So the first thing you see is, I have a master's degree from this reputable institution and this interesting, subject. So it really depends on the story that you want to tell. And I just love resumes because you can be super strategic with them. Like, what story do you want to tell? And so if you have fewer years of work experience, what can you say that, again, you want to be authentic, as I always say, and you want to be obviously honest, but there are ways that you can present it that can tell the story you want to tell, and the image, so to speak, that you want to leave in terms of the first impression that you give. So that's really in terms of, I always speak a lot of times in lawyer language when I'm working with clients, and, it's kind of the discovery process. So in the beginning, let's go through discovery and learn about you. And then before we kind of start on the resume, get a sense of what narrative we want to tell.
It absolutely is a story that you're telling. And that's why it's very good to, if you're not going to work with the coach, even if you're not going to have somebody professional at your side, having somebody that you trust, that you can like bounce ideas off, and how does this come across, essays, the CV itself as well, to be sure that you're getting across the right message. And that message is going to be different from school to school, particularly if you're applying to schools in various countries. Bara was making the point earlier, with the previous episode of MBA Waves, you had somebody speaking about, companies or universities in China or other parts of Asia that may not be as familiar to certain parts of the world. Like some schools in the US might not necessarily know this particular great company or great school. So you might have to explain that more. You might want to have that higher or lower on the CV. The way you present things is going to change a lot. And that's why the CV is really never going to be the same for each school that you're applying for. Mm-hmm. So when someone's updating their CV, Barbara, for an MBA application, what are some of the most important things that you want your clients or people listening to us today to keep in mind?
Well, I'm glad you brought up that question, because it kind of carries from the last bit of the conversation that we had. So this is the formula that I use, is there is distance between you and your background as an applicant and the school to which you're applying and the reader. Okay. So this is, who you are, what you've done that makes sense to you, that may not make sense to the reader. And here's a school that has their objectives. Like, okay, we have institutional priorities with building the class, that we want to recruit more students from particular fields, maybe, or particular parts of the world, et cetera. And that job for you to do when you're doing the resume is to reduce that distance. And so that's the first thing that I tell people. And so, just, if there's anything, and sometimes people will work for a consulting firm, one of the major Deloitte, or they'll work for Amazon. And as a reader, you kind of get that, especially if you're an MBA admissions officer, how many applications do you review where people work for, or resumes you review that people work for Deloitte? Or if it's Amazon, it's like, yeah, I just ordered, a bunch of things. Actually, really quick, funny story. I was going berserk. So I was looking at my Amex account, and I had charged some. Yeah, I bought this. There's one from Amazon for $29.87. I don't buy on stuff on Amazon. My husband always does. I was going crazy. I was on the phone last night for a half hour with Amazon and with American Express trying to figure out. I asked, first of all, was it my husband that he bought it and somehow it got on my card? Was it my son? Was it my other son? They wouldn't tell me. I had to give names, and then they could verify. And then I thought, my 96-year-old dad, I'll just throw the name out there. And I did. And they're like, yep, that was him. And so anyway, so just to give you a sense of we have different daily experiences with different brands. And so we might not quite understand what a certain title is of somebody who does something at Amazon, but we can relate to it because we've engaged with the brand as a consumer, for example. So that was the point of that story. But there's a lot of things that they don't make sense. And you have to really kind of almost dissect that. And so, for example, I worked with somebody this past year and I always have to be careful that I don't kind of give out who the person is. So I'll just say, she worked in investment banking, but she worked in compliance. And so, again, somebody, person who's reading a resume might kind of understand compliance, but not understand the value of it or the benefit of it. So that was the point of the resume, was almost being a translator and translating that into language that the reader could say, wow, I get that. That's important. If we're going to give out those golden tickets, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, this is why this person deserves it. This is the value that they're going to bring in the class. Because we might have students in the class, in the cohort, who want to start a business, have no interest or no, kind of why should compliance matter to them? But they're going to need to know about that. And so that's the first job that I always do, is try to, take the various bullet points and the messaging of the resume and show that the value of what you're going to bring into the program. I talk a lot in formulas, which was interesting since I never did a science or math class in college. I did all like literature and liberal arts. But the equation that I always say you want to work for is that the value that you want to show that you're bringing into the program is greater than the value that you're going to extract from it. So obviously, business schools know that you're going to do the program to change careers or advance your career, and you want something out of it. But I always say you want to show what you're going to give is going to be more than what you're going to get. So the resume is a great place to show what you're going to give. What have you done in whatever job you have done that has, will be valuable for somebody in the cohort too? Why should they know about this? Why would it be useful to have you in the class in this experience? And so I think that's, for first and foremost, the job of the resume is to take your experience, your life, and translate that in a way that's meaningful for the reader.
I think it's a very good point. MBA programs are certainly very much peer-to-peer education. Professors often kind of like moderators of a conversation, and all of these are adults, people have had work experience and so forth and have things to share. And so I like that idea of being able to contribute more than you're going to gain or take the program. Just in terms of it's a very kind of logistical question. Based on the clients you've had in the past and schools that they've applied to around the world, what's the maximum length, if any, do you usually see?
1 to 2, I would say. Some schools are very strict about we only want a 1-page resume. I'm okay with 2 if the school allows it. I think that just gives you more white space. Again, another kind of rule of thumb that I always have is make it easy on the reader. Again, it goes back to what I said at the top of the podcast, that we're so focused on what are we going to do that's going to get us in, that's going to beat that 6% odd, that's going to show all of our accomplishments. But I've been on, and Eric, you have been too, you're on the other side. And I know Bara has seen it from reviewing, with clients that you work with for test prep, is you're trying to make sense of who the person is. And if that is taxing, if that takes me a long time to figure out, I kind of get annoyed about that, to be honest. It's there's only 24 hours in the day. Make it easy for me to understand who it is. So, if you're applying to an executive MBA program, for example, and you've got, 10 plus years of work experience, maybe you extend it to 2 years just to make it easy, in terms of having the white space, of spreading things out, of just, having the format. But I would say the best thing to do is do what the school wants you to do. And so first thing, check out and see if they want 1 page or 2 page.
I remember hearing this since elementary school from our teachers, when all else fails, follow directions. And absolutely, if the school's giving you a template or a format or says we want only 1 page, do that. If they say only 2 references, don't provide 3. So that's another thing. But I also find myself saying very often, getting to the point is a skill, and your first opportunity to show that you have this skill is your CV. If you've been working if you're 30 years old, it's probably very difficult to get your entire life and career on even 5 pages, let alone 2. And that is something that takes time. Demonstrating, or let's say having the same or greater impact with less space, less paper, less time, less resources, less pixels, because we're all reading it on a screen, right? So, I definitely prefer my clients to have 1-pagers. If they really want to, that's fine, as long as the school will permit it for that particular program. But that kind of everything can be seen in one space, and really, you're not going to be able to say everything. But that's where you're really picking and choosing the things that are going to sell you the most, that have the most impact, that show, like you said, Barbara, contribution in the classroom conversations. All of that. Okay. I was also wondering, have you had some experiences with clients that have really had a hard time getting it under that 2 max or 1 max? And what would you recommend? Really
I love a challenge. It's so much fun. It really much. It's like putting together a puzzle. It's like you have certain pieces and you got to get them to fit, and you can't, And so again, it goes back to it's all, there might all be great points or great experiences. But what's the best of the best? What's going to really kind of sell you as a prospective candidate, or create that, and it sounds kind of simplistic and kind of not very academic serious, but what's a cool factor about you? Schools, if I always encourage prospective students to read the blogs and articles that schools put out in the beginning of the cohort year, where they tout the class. Now, I always have to smile because everyone says, we recruited a very impressive class. I've never seen one that says, yeah, we got an average class, It's always like the most impressive class. I'm like, how do I feel if I'm somebody from last year, on that? But again, I'll see things like this person was a Black Hawk helicopter pilot, or, this person. So they always love having that kind of like that reveal to say all the cool people in the class, or this person was, I just saw this weekend, in fact, somebody who had like 2 silver medals from the Olympics, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of thing I would say is what, and again, some jobs, you might not have, and don't worry, like if you haven't been a Black Hawk helicopter, don't like think, oh my God, I'll never get into Stanford or whatever, but it's what can you say that's the kind of cool factor that you can kind of tease out. And that's probably the first thing that I would say in terms of, kind of whittling it down, the content. And then some of the exercises that I do are fun. Once you've whittled it down and you kind of can't really do that anymore, then there's certain tricks you can do. And so if you have a bullet and it's all one line, but then it wraps to the second line with 2 words, that's a challenge. How can you get rid of those 2 words? Again, how can you create, maximize the space with some of the tools? Maybe you have, the word "the" in a sentence, and you don't really need to do that. Maybe there's a shorter word you can use. So, first of all, I always say kind of like, it's almost like the essay writing too. Put everything out there that you want to say, and then when the job of the editing comes in and deciding, what gets on the cutting room floor and what stays in. And it might take a couple iterations, but I always say to people, like, I know people don't think of it as fun to apply to business school, but I think it's fun. And it's kind of like, again, an opportunity, a challenge to say like, okay, how can I do this? How can I narrow this down and make it fit to 1 page or 2 pages, et cetera. Along the way, what I also wanted to add is optics is a key word that I often use. And how do you come across? If you have like your current job that you've been for 5 years and you've got 2 bullet points, but then you have a job from 10 years ago and you've got like 10, what does that say? It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't look, like, so trying to make sure the bullets are like, I always kind of like to have an extra bullet, for the first current job, and then, 1 fewer bullet for the one after that or previous to that, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of think of it kind of individually in terms of all the different work experiences and everything that you're putting in that. And then also as a whole, optically, how does it come across?
Mm-hmm.
The optics, I think, it's super important. Like the aesthetics of one's resume is important. Like I've seen some resumes that are really, dare I say, garish because they've got like pictures and graphics and lots of things going on, and you get really distracted. So I do think that that's important. I also wonder if you know a really good resource for verb action, right? Like I think that when you have really just delicious verbs that are used, and it's not like improve, increase, right? Like you have words that are a little bit more evocative and a little bit deeper than some. Are there any places besides the thesaurus that you would recommend folks look at to find some really good verbiage?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I love that point, and it's so you, Bara, because you are just a mistress of language. I just love the words that you choose. You're just exquisite in your writing. I really enjoy that. And so, yeah, I have to say thesaurus is the best friend. Go into Google, go into thesaurus and put increase and see what else comes up. It's just probably a rule of life anyway. Read. I spend way too much time reading, not enough time cooking. That's another story in and of itself. But, if you read a lot, you'll pick up words and you'll just kind of be in your mind and your lexicon to use. But the other thing I would say is going back to that formula of reducing the distance between yourself and the school. Speak in the language of the business school language or the business school speak, or the keywords that are important to them. So if you applying to business school, one of the best things you can do is follow them on social media, is to read the blogs of students, is to read Poets and Quants, Best and Brightest, which always, I kind of smile at that because I'm like, yeah, but everyone is great. So it's kind of like, but anyway, and see the language and the words and the verbs, action verbs that the school uses. Again, you don't want to sound like a parrot. You don't want to sound like you're pandering to the school. But that might be a great way to kind of think of some things that keywords you can integrate into your resume, action verbs, and other words that are important to the school. These days, just by and large, sustainability, sustainable, I've got a whole bunch of them in my mind that I see over and over again.
That's amazing. I mean, that's why it's so useful to work with somebody, right, on your resume and on your essays. And like what Eric was saying before is like, if you're not working with someone, make sure that someone can look at your material and not just send it in, because even a comma in the wrong place looks jarring to someone, right? And you don't want to have that jarring experience. You want everything to be flow. And so this is what you're talking about, is exactly why it's so important to have someone look over what you're doing. What about if someone's coming from a non-business background, right? So how do they present the transferable skills or make it unique enough so that, they fix those helicopters that you were talking about, right? They weren't coming from the background or that background, or they were an Olympic winner and all of a sudden they realized they really want to go into business. How do you capture someone's attention to make you seem really attractive on your resume?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it's just so awesome that people encourage people to apply with non-traditional backgrounds. I think there's, certainly a myth that, if you're a consultant, if you're an engineer, if you're, investment banker, that those are the traditional MBA candidates, and they are. But again, going back to the reader, if you're clicking on and you're reading file after file, it's like, great, another engineer, great, another investor. I mean, no disrespect, but it's like all of that. And then all of a sudden I see a ballet dancer. I'm like, thank you. That makes my day more interesting. This makes it really cool. So I really encourage people to embrace that. And then in terms of like, I wouldn't worry as much to be like, okay, I have to translate like, I'm even trying to think of some ballet words or whatever, pirouette or whatever, into kind of business speak or whatever. But just think of what's the goal and what's the mission of the business school. And if I go into, Yale SOM, for example, it's business leaders for business and society, or Harvard is leaders to make a difference in the world. There's just so many different ones. I'm trying to remember all the ones in there. So I would just take what you do, like say you're that ballet dancer, and how can you translate in your resume to show that you're somebody who's already on that path? You're somebody who else has made, again, without kind of, this is where the kind of fine wording and fine tuning comes in. It's like, you don't want to write a whole paragraph on why the arts are essential for a civilized society and, well-being and all that. But it's true. And certainly you could say, especially during a pandemic, maybe you were part of a ballet company and you helped create an online virtual experience so people would still have access to the arts or something like that. That's the kind of stuff you want to put in your resume to show how you've made that impact and what you've done that has made a difference in the organization itself, or into the experience of your customer base. Again, it's mostly a exercise in translation. But again, I go back to the cool things. What have you done that's super cool? Maybe you could say like, hey, we did, like years ago, we did a performance in a part of the world that like people don't usually visit, but you did it because the company felt that it was important to introduce, arts to this part of the world. That's where I'm going to say like the golden ticket, like, oh my God, how interesting is that this person, I get ballet, but that they were part of this team environment that, introduced arts to, a very closed society in part of the world, et cetera. So I just think that's like, almost do that exercise, right? Like take a, whatever you use. I'm old fashioned, pen and paper, but people will use, their technology and just like, okay, what have I done? What are some interesting things? And then once you have that, then you can take it and translate it to the resume.
Thank you, Barbara. What you said about the arts being essential for a civilized society, I couldn't agree more. And it makes me think of that quote often attributed to Winston Churchill, whether we are sure about that or not, where he basically is talking about the war and cutting funding for the arts to support the war effort. It's like, if we cut the funding for the arts, what are we fighting for, right? So I totally agree with that. And I've also been several times very intrigued, excited, felt the challenge for candidates, clients who are coming from the arts, like the dancer. Dance is a very rigorous career, and your body can only take it for a certain number of years, maybe 15, 20 max, I don't know. And so the ones who are really ambitious and want to, pivot to something like a career in business, an MBA is a perfect thing. And like you said, the uniqueness of their profile actually is more of a selling point than a problem, right? As you said, we've seen many engineers and engineers out there, that you are often overrepresented. That's okay. But for those who are coming from more unique fields, this is a selling point. So that's great. I've often said and shared the sentiment with many of my colleagues that an MBA is one of the more or most transversal degrees in the world, pulling in people from every sector of business or work, and kind of spitting out graduates to every sector. So it's very exciting in that way. So that said, somebody who is a career changer, like from a non-traditional business sector, I'm just curious your take on it. Like those kind of introductory paragraphs on the CV or on the resume, it might be introduction or it might be like a short anecdote or excerpt. Do you often like those as kind of like profile overviews in prose form in the beginning of a CV, or you're not a fan of that? What's your take?
Case by case. Again, it just really depends on the narrative and the person. Sometimes you need that in terms of maybe there's somebody with different experiences in all different sectors, and you need a way to tie it all together. And that summary at the top can basically identify the commonalities that kind of tell a cohesive story. So that can be helpful. Or maybe you have to provide evidence. And again, I talked about the distance between the applicant and the reader, but the other job to do is to minimize the risk. Every time an admissions officer admits someone to a program, it's a risk. Okay, it's a risk in a couple different ways. One, it's a risk that they won't perform well academically. That's why the GMAT, that's why people like Bara stars in the process to help people with their test scores. It's to reduce that risk. And then also it could be a risk that, again, look at what the content that the schools put out. And one of the common metrics that always comes out is 90% of our students have jobs 3 months after graduation. That's something that's very much a key indicator, a key metric that schools tout. So again, if I'm the admissions person, I want to reduce the risk that person's going to again, having done marketing for schools and being on that side of things, the last thing you want to do is say, hey, guess what? 97% of our students got jobs last year, and this year, 92% of them. You never want to go down. You always want to stay the same or go up. And so that's where a heading can help reduce that risk. To basically say, maybe you can just kind of weave in some of your extracurricular activities. And that's part of the narrative of why you want to, combine your interest and your passion from extracurricular with your, some skill sets, maybe finance, in your work experience to tell where you want to go in the future. So again, it's all part of that discovery and seeing what story you want to tell. And again, I always kind of say, make every word worth it. It's limited real estate and worth my time. And if you're going to put a summary on there that's just kind of yeah, okay, whatever, that's fine. You've wasted my time reading something because I have to read so much. And so don't put it on there.
I agree. It's a case by case thing, and it depends is the answer that we find ourselves saying very often. But that's good. That's good news, because that means not every CV or resume is going to be cookie cutter and identical to each other, which makes them more interesting for us to help support people creating and for the people in admissions to read. But you spoke about mitigating risk, and I think that's very interesting, which made me think about what to do, going back to the previous part of the conversation about putting all your experiences in, that if you have to cut things out, that might mean that it appears that you have a gap in your employment, or you may actually have a gap in your employment for a variety of reasons. What's your take on that? Is that problematic? If so, what do you do? If not, how do you best represent yourself?
So that's where the optional essay comes in that most schools have. And so, like I said, admissions readers have seen it all. They've heard it all. Nothing's going to be a surprise. You're not the first person to have a gap on your resume. You're not the first person who's, had a GPA that's, kind of lower than what you want it to be. But they want to understand context. And back when I had more kind of general marketing reading time than I do now, I just kind of focus on the business school world. I read some research about biases. And there is a bias. I forget what the actual term of this particular bias is, but if something doesn't make sense or if something doesn't look great, people automatically have a negative assumption. So here's an example. If there is a gap on your resume, it's like this person couldn't find a job for 3 years, rather than the assumption like, I wonder if they had an elderly relative and they took time off to take care of them. If I'm a business school admissions reader, there's going to be 2 different reactions to those different scenarios. And so that's where I say, put all the facts, so to speak, in a very, friendly way, and friendly in terms of digesting for the reader and compelling way, but then use the optional essay to say, don't worry about it for the resume if I'm trying to figure out how to do that. That's where the optional essay can put that together.
Yeah, definitely agree. Give context, use the optional essay if there is one. I'm going to challenge you a little bit more, Barbara. What if the school doesn't allow for an optional essay?
I think you can put it on your resume too. It depends on the scenario. But maybe you can just put on caretaker for, a couple years and maybe something that you've done. So again, I'm somebody, I really, really empathize with this because I was a stay-at-home mom for 7 years and I had a huge gap, but not for applying to business school, but to work in business schools, to work in admissions. And so I try to find a clever way to put like stay-at-home mom, but like the skill set that I got that would be valuable to working in higher ed. And so I know higher ed is very political. And so I used to say, UN style, and one of my bullets, negotiation tactics for working with different kids fighting over toys and things like that. So I think there are ways that you can, if you don't have the optional essay, you can professionally, and sometimes with a bit of humor, and humor is great if it's well done, well played. You can put that certainly in the resume and address that. Maybe you have like not extracurricular, but maybe you have something at the bottom like additional experience or additional kind of activities, just something that kind of reduces that question or just says, okay, I get it. That's fine. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I think what it's all about is not being afraid of our truth, our reality. There's various reasons why we might have a gap in our employment. Like you said, could be taking care of an elderly family member, could have been your own health. You might have decided to travel. There could be a variety of reasons why, and that could be expressed on your CV or in an optional essay. Absolutely. And it might even be in a kind of side conversation. Like sometimes that comes up in conversations with the admissions rep if you've developed a relationship with them, which first of all I always suggest is a great idea to do. But in particular, if you have a special case that you want to float the idea among them and ask them or get to know, if you have the opportunity to communicate with the admissions reps or recruiters, what is the best way to express this special case that you might be dealing with. So that said, look, there is so much we can talk about when it comes to CVs, resumes, and so forth. But I think we're going to stop there because we could just go on and on. And Barbara, I want to thank you so much for your insights. And all of us can be reached via the MBA Waves website or in LinkedIn. Barbara, anything else you want to add before we wrap it up for tonight?
Oh gosh, putting me on the spot here. Just again, it's mindset. It's going back to, this is something that Bara again specializes in mindset and kind of flipping the narrative of saying like, oh God, it's a chore. I'm applying to business school. I've got to take the test. I've got to spend all this time, or I've got to, work on the resume. Think of it as a growth opportunity. I've had so many people I've seen have written like just going through the experience of applying. Again, how much they've learned about themselves, how much they've grown, the skill sets that are transferable. Maybe you don't get into Stanford and that was your top choice to get into another school, but you picked up skills in doing test prep that's going to help you later down the road when you're in, working on the curriculum. That's going to help you be a faster, mind flow. When I'm thinking about, there's a lot of reading to do in in school. And so techniques like that. And so again, just think of it as like, here's an opportunity to make, instead of having a kind of an addition to my daily life that's going to be onerous and going to be, a negative, how can I make that a positive? And that's kind of my tip.
What I'm also super important is that you're not going to take the resume that you've used for work and for your jobs and just send that in, right? You really want to think very conscientiously, very, really dig in deep the way that you do in all the other aspects of your application, and really look at this as what you were talking about, real estate. It's not only good real estate on there, but it's the real estate of the person who's reading your resume. It's their time that you're going to be captivating. So using this time to really have another entree into them wanting you, because you're approaching it like, look at how much I'm going to bring to the school. This is how much I'm going to be offering you. So this is super helpful. And yeah, there's so much more we could talk about.
Yeah, and actually, you know what? Can I just add one quick thing too that I just thought of?
Yeah.
I think when people are applying to, and it's a very intimidating process because, you know, you visualize the campus and the building and, all of that. But at the end of the day, they're real people who are reading your resume. And a lot of times this time of year, or even a month ago, I saw a lot of ads out on LinkedIn of like looking for temporary auxiliary readers for Wharton or UNC Keenan-Flagler or Stanford, et cetera. So again, they're bringing outside. And so anyone who's reading has their own life experience. And so if you feel like this pressure of like, you've got to be perfect and you've got to kind of impress, no, you don't want to. You want to be impressive, but you don't want to impress. You want to relate and you want to connect with the reader. And I think that's kind of the job to do. A lot of the head of admissions, they've had their own life stories. One of whom, again, I will protect confidentiality. She got laid off for her job once. So she's like, I'm really empathetic when I see a resume where somebody got laid off. She goes, it happened to me. So again, just kind of think about it in human terms versus like, logos and sleek buildings and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, circumstance is going to happen to anybody, and I think the measure of somebody being impressive or not is not about like what life has thrown at you, but how you deal with it. So when things come up, demonstrates, okay, this happened in my life or to someone close to me, and this is the thing that was important to me, and this is how I reacted, and so forth. So it's all how you spin it, and that's what us coaches are here to help you do. So. As the title suggests, September is International Update Your CV/Resume Month. Whether you're applying to an MBA or not, it's a great moment to reflect, take stock of what you've accomplished and what you've gone through so far, and to update your resume before you need to, because sometimes you might need it in a pinch and you don't want to be stuck. So anyway, thank you once again, Bara, as always.
It was fun. Thanks.
And don't forget to join us next week on MBA Waves, same bat channel, same bat time. Till then, have a great week and see you next Tuesday. Bye, everyone.
I'll say that to you in Paris.